Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Monday's morning event. I'm very pleased to have you all on board, and I'm very pleased to see a few people still ticking in. So great to see everyone. And welcome. My name is Anne Birkeland. I am Senior Market Advisor at the UK's Department of International Trade. And I'm hosting this event together with my colleague here at the British Embassy in Oslo, Linda Dahlberg, our Science and Innovation Policy Advisor. As you can see on the screen, we're also joined by a great set of expert speakers and partners. And one of the British Embassy's objective is to basically facilitate partnership building and knowledge sharing in areas that is in rapidly developing. And for us, it was therefore no doubt that we also need to address the innovation happening in artificial intelligence. The AI global market size is expected to reach nearly $170 billion by 2025, and the UK and the Nordics are well placed to take advantage of this market opportunity. Therefore, our focus today is to cover and hopefully leave you with a clear answer to three key points. One, how the British Embassy and the UK government's departments can be a strategic partner to international companies, research and academia when working with and entering the UK market. Secondly, why the UK is the home for tech and AI innovation with its world-leading AI ecosystem. And we'll talk a little bit about the opportunities that presents for new and existing companies coming to this market. And third, innovation cannot scale inside its own borders, and building bridges between countries is key to explore the full potential of AI innovation. And so we'll discuss the topics of cross-border collaboration and the future of our markets into panel discussion later on this webinar. As per most webinars you are attending these days, it would be great if you could keep your camera switched off and Microsoft on mute, just not to disturb our speakers. Please use the chat function during the event, and we will address the questions after each speaker segment. And our agenda today, you can see on the screen, and we will open with the first point, which is to give a little bit of an introduction to myself and my colleague Linda. So over to you, Linda, to talk to us about our SIN network.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you so much to everyone for tuning in this morning. So my name is Linda Solstrand-Dahlberg. I am the Science Innovation Policy Advisor at the British Embassy in Oslo. I am part of what is called the Science and Innovation Network, which is a network that consists of over 100 SINers, as we like to call ourselves, in over 40 countries throughout the world. We are funded both by the Department of Business, Energy and International Strategy, as well as the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And as you know, science and technology plays a key role in the heart of the UK's government strategy, as is most recently emphasized in the integrated review. And so it's our aim to build and strengthen international collaborations and partnerships in science and innovation, and to establish strategic collaborations to leverage funding for research and innovation and to further develop.
I think I'm here now.
Oh, I'm sorry, what's that? You can hear me okay, right? Okay, good. I'll just carry on then. Please remember to mute your microphones. As I was saying, we're also trying to leverage funding for research and innovation and to further develop bilateral science relationships, and thus essentially driving prosperity and growth through science diplomacy. So that's a little bit about SIN. I will hand over to you, Anne, again to tell more about the Department of International Trade. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Linda. So very quickly, our Department of International Trade, we work as the government's international economic department, and we're responsible for bringing together policy, promotion, and financial expertise to break down barriers for trade and investments. And so DIT around the world, we work across both product and services in all sectors. And so our activities, they involve around supplying advice and information, and we're based on the global network of UK embassies. We have 107 worldwide. And DIT has many roles, but the two main areas that we work in is, on one side, we help UK businesses export and grow into global markets. And on the other side, we help overseas companies, and in this case, Nordic and Baltic based companies, to locate, grow, and ultimately succeed in the UK. And so on the screen, you can see some of our top services, which myself and colleagues around at local posts are offering to companies free of charge and at a confidential basis. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for joining this event today. And now I will hand over to my colleague, Dr. Chris Moore. He is our technology specialist at the Department of International Trade. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Anna, and good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be talking to you this morning about one of my favorite topics, artificial intelligence. And today, what I will be doing is to give you a quick overview of the AI landscape in the UK, and in particular with reference to collaboration and setting up a company in the UK. As Anna explained, we in the Department for International Trade support companies to look at opportunities in the UK. My particular role here is focusing on technology. I cover right across the technology spectrum, so everything from artificial intelligence and data science at one end through to areas like enterprise cloud, smart cities, and cybersecurity. Now, if we think about artificial intelligence, there are many opportunities for AI, and many of us will be very familiar with some of the ones that have been established for some time. So AI has been used in the financial services sector and the healthcare sector for quite a few years. And artificial intelligence itself is not a new topic. However, I think what has changed in the last 5 years in particular is the use of AI in a number of other sectors. And I'm not going to go through examples of all of these, but for instance, the use of things like computer vision and machine learning in areas like manufacturing, in environmental management and food and drink, and increasingly in areas like agriculture. So we'll touch on that a little bit as we go through the presentation this morning, but just to say that the UK is a great market for companies that are looking to expand their businesses internationally, and mainly because the UK is a nation of early adopters. So UK consumers and UK businesses love new technology and are very quick to see the benefits of applying new technologies such as AI. Now, the UK has been very active in the AI space for quite a long time. As I said, AI is not new. We've been doing R&D in AI for decades. But I think what's happened again in the last 5 years or so is a distinct emphasis on artificial intelligence. So in 2018, for instance, as part of the industrial strategy, UK government announced a close to £1 billion of new investment for artificial intelligence. And I think if somebody could mic that, if they could mute their mic, that would be helpful. Thank you. And so the focus on AI has been there for some number of years. This new investment of close to £1 billion was focused on a number of things, but particularly looking at supporting research and development, supporting the development of a talent pool, and really focusing on skills and the uptake of AI. So making it easier for businesses to understand the implications of adopting artificial intelligence within their own organization. I mentioned funding for research and development, and in fact, a lot of this has been through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, and this is really focused on longer term research where AI can play a role. And again, I'll come back and talk about a bit more about that in detail in a minute. Equally well, in 2019, it was announced that the National Health Service is going to set up a national AI lab. And this is really focusing on one of the hottest topics for AI right now, which is the application of machine learning and other technologies to healthcare, and particularly in the recent past with the background of COVID. And the UK's funding agency, UK Research and Innovation, published a very good report recently, Transforming Our World with AI. And there is a particular theme within the report talking about how AI can be used to combat COVID-19. Now, I mentioned this strategy fund a few minutes ago. I wanted to go into a little bit more detail and talk about some of the themes that have been important here with respect to AI. There are four large themes, if you like, great themes within the fund program. And you can see these on the screen here, but looking at some of the key challenges for society going forward. But artificial intelligence has its own theme, but at the same time, it relates to the other three. And since the initiation of this challenge fund, there have been more than 20 challenges. And you can see here on the slide some of the areas where AI has played a role. A lot of these are self-evident, but in areas like manufacturing, using AI and robotics, machine learning, computer vision to improve manufacturing efficiencies. In food production, so things like precision farming, using drones and computer vision and machine learning again to really optimize the use of nutrients in the soil. In transportation, a lot of applications, and in next generation services, looking at applying AI to areas like accountancy and legal services. Now, you'll hear from a number of key organizations in the UK today, including the Alan Turing Institute. And this is just to give you a little bit of an early reference point. The Alan Turing Institute is the national facility for AI and data science in the UK. Currently, they have a partnership with many universities across the UK and beyond, and in particular, a number of strategic partnerships. However, they work with many, many different companies, and you'll hear more about this later in the session. But suffice to say, it is a very strong focal point for AI in the UK. Now, as part of that investment that I talked about a few minutes ago, there has been the setting up of 16 separate university centers for doctoral training in artificial intelligence. Now, these are, if you like, again, key institutes of centers of excellence in AI. And here are those universities. And as you can see, they fall into a number of broad categories, but again, a very strong emphasis on healthcare. Of course, there are other universities in the UK that also focus on AI, and I think AI is seeing a growth across the whole of the R&D environment. Now, in terms of thinking about the support available for early stage companies, I think it's important to look at that environment specifically. And the UK has a number of different programs that come from the public sector and also the private sector. And just to give you a few examples here, an organization called Tech Nation, which, as you can see in the slide, is the network supported by government to support early stage companies and to support entrepreneurs in particular. So there are a whole series of different mechanisms to support entrepreneurs, from the Digital Business Academy, which begins to tell entrepreneurs or give information and support for entrepreneurs about the skills that they will need to grow their business, through to scale-up programs, such as you can see on the screen, so Upscale and Future 50, which are designed to identify and support the next generation of unicorns. But in particular, Tech Nation also runs specific programs on individual sectors. Not a huge number. In fact, I think it's 4 currently, but one of them is on applied AI. So typically they would take around 30 companies each year, provide them with help and support, guidance, support for routes to market and raising funding and mentorship. And this program has been very successful. It's really targeted on scale-up companies in artificial intelligence. Of course, there are examples from the private sector, and there isn't time to talk about all of these, but just to pick a few. So AI Seed is, as the name suggests, focused on the seed stage, so providing low levels of funding, typically around £100,000, for a number of companies throughout the year, typically 20 or so companies. And this is really supporting the pre-seed and seed stage of funding for AI companies. And then Entrepreneur First, which is a very well-established accelerator for deep tech, but particularly for artificial intelligence and data science. And many of the companies that have passed through this particular program have been very, very successful, some of which have become unicorns, I believe. Now, thinking about the UK as a whole and trying to compare the UK's environment for early stage companies to other countries around the rest of Europe. Clearly, there are many reports that give different statistics, but this report that came from MMC Ventures just before the pandemic, I think gives you a good snapshot. And you can see that the UK, from their analysis, had around, well, close to 500 early stage companies, which was more than France and Germany put together. And you can see the relative order in terms of the numbers of companies. Since this report was put together, there have been others, and the most recent reports that I've seen have indicated that there are around 1,000 early stage companies in AI in the UK currently. Now, of course, it does depend a little bit on your definition, and some companies will, of course, say that they're AI companies when in fact they're probably not, and they're just trying to use the buzzword of AI to promote their own business. However, I think it is fair to say that there are currently, as I said, around 1,000 AI companies in the UK. Now, in terms of the help and support that exists in the UK, if I was an early stage company coming to the UK, what kind of organizations would be there to help me? Well, I've already talked about the Alan Turing Institute, which is clearly a focal point for AI and data science within the UK. But there are also industry organizations like Tech UK, which is the trade association for the tech sector, but has a particular theme or activity within Tech UK, which focuses on supporting AI and cloud in particular. So running regular events, providing network, and help to connect to companies that you may want to partner with or sell products and services to. Equally well, there are a series of catapults or innovation centres in the UK, and the digital catapult is very much focused on themes like AI and data science. Community groups like Cognition X, which is in fact the biggest community of AI companies the largest community for individuals interested in AI, and they have a membership of more than 8,000 people. They run regular events like CogX, which last year ran virtually and attracted more than 40,000 people. So from that perspective, there are lots of groups that will help the community help companies to find routes to market and partners. But equally well, if you're more interested in the skills aspect or R&D, organizations like the Bay Centre in Edinburgh is the central focal point for AI in Scotland, and the Institute of Coding and the British Chartered Institute for IT, the British Computer Society, focus very much on the skills development around AI as well. Now, later on, you're going to be hearing more on ethics and AI and challenges to adoption of AI across industry and across broader society. I just wanted to highlight a few of the key organizations here, starting with the Open Data Institute, which was set up more than 10 years ago, focusing on helping companies to derive value from their data. And they continue to work both with the public sector and the private sector, looking at the use of data and in particular thinking about the ethics. The Alan Turing Institute is also published in this area and is very active. But I think the key organization here is the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation, who have published a lot of reports and guidance and information for companies and individuals looking to apply AI in different areas. Now, going back to the journey for an early stage company, thinking about the UK, thinking about, well, I've just learned about some of the organizations, some of the opportunities, but one of the other key things for any early stage company is thinking about funding. And of course, there are many different opportunities and different approaches that you can take in the UK. I already mentioned funding that comes from UK RI, so from the public sector, but equally well, the UK is the most significant venture capital market in Europe with more than £15 billion pounds of investment last year. Now, if you want to find out more, there are, of course, communities like the British Venture Capital Association. The British Business Bank has a very good website. This is supported by government and gives a lot of guidance about how to raise funding, as does TechNation. But equally well, independent websites like the Entrepreneur Handbook give you a lot of practical guidance and help about how to approach investors and how to find investors from that perspective as well. Now, again, thinking about if I'm a Nordic company, AI company looking to explore the UK, well, what kind of environment is it? Where should I go? How easy will it be able to set up my business? Well, this is where DIT can really help, I think, in terms of guidance and signposting to the right kind of environments. Prior to COVID, I would have said many companies would want to come and find their own workspace. At that time, there were more than 1,000 across the whole of the UK, a significant number in London. Of course, the dynamic has changed a little bit, but nevertheless, after we get back after the pandemic to more conventional times, I think this will still be important. And perhaps what's more significant for this audience is that across the 30 or so digital clusters in the UK, there are quite a few that focus specifically on artificial intelligence in different areas. I myself are located close to Cambridge, which has a very strong AI community, for instance, but equally well across many of the other cities, as you see on the slide. All supported by many incubator and accelerator programs, as I highlighted earlier. Now, before I finished, I just wanted to give you a couple of examples about some companies that DIT has worked with in the recent past. So on the left-hand side, eBot7, which is a German conversational AI company, and they have set up in the Greater London area recently, and they wanted to look at market opportunities and talent and growing their business in the UK. Equally well, this company actually comes from Latin America, InMotion Group comes from Latin America, from Colombia, and they chose to set up their business in Edinburgh, and they're in the mobility space, applying AI for a number of areas in mobility, and they chose Edinburgh because of the ability to access research and development talent and to interact with the university. But of course, we support not just the small companies, but also the larger companies, and all of these have set up AI and or data science facilities in the UK, so respectively in London, in Cambridge, in Hampshire, in Edinburgh, in the Thames Valley, and in Cambridge. So right across the UK, essentially. And again, if you are looking for more information about the whole of the UK, please let us know, because we're here to help. Here's just a summary of some of the key trade shows and conferences. I think these are all fairly self-evident. Suffice to say, there's a lot going on in the UK, and if you're looking for the right kind of trade show, we can certainly help you. And finally, I just wanted to give a few words of I guess, advice and learnings from companies that have come from other markets, and particularly from the Nordics to the UK. Some things to think about. Clearly, with AI, there's a huge market opportunity, but I think the companies that do best are the ones that are very clear about who they want to sell to. So be it financial services or manufacturing or healthcare, then to be very focused about who your customer is. Of course, once you set up that UK entity, then you can access the funding, as I described. But think, particularly now in more virtual times, not just about London, which of course is more expensive than other cities. Particularly strong are cities these days like Leeds and Manchester and Birmingham, because they're lower cost, but have very good ecosystems and strong talent pools. There is a lot of support for startups, as I highlighted earlier, many ways to access talent, and to collaborate with universities. But I think the key message here is that we can help you with all of that. So don't worry too much about the details, but just get in contact with DIT and we can signpost you to the right kinds of partnerships. And the final point I would say is also think about the UK as a springboard to other markets. Many companies I speak to are also interested in selling their products or services to North America or to the Middle East or to India, for instance. And in that way, once you have set up a UK entity, we will treat you like a UK company and therefore help you to export internationally. And with that, I will say thank you very much for your attention. Here are my contact details, but please feel free to contact DIT through Anna. And in that respect, we will be able to help you with the next steps of your entrepreneurial or scale-up journey. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to Dr. Chris Moll for providing us with a very insightful overview of the UK's AI ecosystem, as well as opportunities in the sector. Just mindful of time, let's go to the next speaker, which is Professor Dame Wendy Hall. Professor Hall, she holds many titles and has an impressive track record of involvement in the field of AI and computer science, as well as in science and technology in general. I won't go through her entire bio, as that would take too long, but just to mention a few things. She's the Regius Professor of Computer Science at the University of Southampton. She's previously been a member of the UK Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology. She was a founding member of the European Research Council and chair of the European Commission's ISTAG. She was a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Futures Council on the digital economy. And she's also co-chair of the UK government's Artificial Intelligence Review, which was published in 2017, sorry. And she's also a member of the UK's AI Council. So today she will talk about the AI Council and its recently published AI roadmap. So welcome, Wendy, over to you.
Have you got my slides?
Yes, I can share them.
Can you share them and do the next? I'll do the next slide thing. Or did you want me to try and get them up? Because I haven't got. That never works for me.
Give me 1 second, and you should all be seeing them.
Yeah, that's it.
Right.
Do you want
to let me know when you
do the next slide thing? Thank you. Right. Thank you very much. So, yes, straight in. Well, I've been a professor. I've been a professor. I've been in computer science since the 80s, and I started in AI actually, then went off into multimedia and the internet and everything. And I'm now back in AI deeply in terms of policy. And I was, I had a phone call from number 10 Downing Street in February 2017 to ask me if I would co-chair an AI review for the government with Jerome Pesenti, who at the time was CEO of Benevolent AI in London. And so we set out, we had a very short period of time to consult with everybody to produce a review by July 2017, which was eventually published in October 2017. And the reason behind this was very much that well, there were several things going on in the world. We just voted for Brexit in the referendum, and the government was looking for interesting things to do to take the heat off of that, I think. This is Theresa May's government. And also, I think, and the future, right? What was the future of the UK and the world was very much a big topic. And at the same time, there were two books out, one from the World Economic Forum, which was by Klaus Schwab, who runs the forum, on the the fourth revolution, which very much said countries that get AI and can use AI and develop AI will win. And of course, then you're also looking at the book by Kai-Fu Lee, which talked about the US and China as the AI superpowers. So the UK had to look at itself as a small island off the coast of Europe, and what was its future in AI. Because we clearly didn't have the scale to scale up as US and China have, in no sense of the word scale up, and we were about to leave Europe. And what was our position? How could we best invest money so that we could use AI to support the economy, right? To grow the economy and grow jobs. So we were not asked to look at how many jobs would be lost. Other reports had done that. We were asked to think about how we retrained people who might lose their jobs because of AI, but we were not asked to look at how many jobs might go. We were also not asked to look at the question of ethics directly. And Chris mentioned the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. I want to make the point here that our review did not cover the ethics in AI. We were explicitly told not to include that because the Royal Society had a report out at the time on machine learning, very, very influential report. And we knew, because we were talking to them, that they were recommending in their report the government set up a Centre for Data Ethics. And all we had to do in our review was back that and say what we said, of course, there's a need to worry about ethics, and we should have an organisation, a centre at arm's length from government, and it was eventually set up as, I think in 2018, as the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, which Chris mentioned. So we didn't actually address the ethics question. It's implicit in what we do. We were also asked not to tackle diversity. This was not meant to be a report about the lack of women in computing, but I resisted that one. I can't see you. You're all supposed to laugh now because you're supposed to know how passionate I am about women in computing. But so I did resist that one, and in fact we did put diversity, and I'll talk about that later, about how it's still a big challenge. So the chronology from all this was we presented our report to the government and published it in October 2017. It was accepted by the government. By November of that year, it was part of the industrial strategy, and by April 2018, we had a sector deal, which really just these names change over between different governments, but in that government, that meant they would put money into the budget to spend on the recommendations that we had put into the review. At that point, the Office for AI was set up, which is really important. And people are, when I talk about this around the world, they say, what's the most important thing? The most important thing is that government has a strategy. That's, it's different for every country. It's going to have a different context. The context for the UK is that despite the fact we're a small island and can't do the scale up thing, we have two major legacies. One is we have incredibly strong universities, and Chris mentioned this, and we've been doing research in AI since Alan Turing, and we have very strong research legacy in AI. And one of the things we recommended in the review was that we set up the Alan Turing Institute, which has been set up for data science. We set that up as a National Institute for AI and Data Science, has the right name, Turing. So we have a very strong research legacy. Our problem is we don't always turn that into big companies, and that's partly just because of the scale. We have to look outside the UK for the companies to be able to scale up. So the investment is bound to go or come from outside the UK eventually, and that's the hard thing for the UK to deal with. But on the other hand, we do have an incredibly vibrant startup culture. Again, as Chris mentioned, we at the time, I don't know what the actual figures are now, we used to talk about having twice as many AI startups as the rest of Europe put together. And that wasn't being smug about it. It was just actually government policy over the years. Different governments had invested in this and into a tech startup culture, which had evolved into an AI startup culture. So these two major things to build on. So the Office for AI was set up and straddled two departments, DCMS and BAYS, in the UK, but it's meant to operate across all sectors. They have no resource really, but it's for skills and for adoption of AI across both public and private sectors. And then, as recommended in the review, by 2019, it only took 2 years, as these things do. The AI Council that I sit on was set up, which supports the Office for AI and is independent of government. Tabitha Goldstubb is the chair, and I'm the UK AI Skills Champion. And we helped the Office for AI implement the things from the review, what had been recommended. And then by June 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, we're talking on Teams or whatever, and talking about, well, actually it's 3 years, can you believe, since the AI review was published. So we really need to look at what's been done and where we need to go next. So that ended up with the publication of the AI roadmap, which you can read online, and I'm just going to go through that now. So that, if you go next slide, please. I think I've gone through that. We can skip that. I think you can have the slides later. Here's the council membership, and just go back to the council membership. I think you can see a mix. It's very diverse mix, as in every sense of the word: industry and academia, government folk, people who've worked in government. Adrian Smith at the top left there is currently the head of the Turing Institute and the president of the Royal Society, and there's me, and then Tabitha Goldstubb, who's the chair of the council, is the third in from the left, and you can see all the others if you dig in through the slide. Thank you. Next slide, please. So yes, we started to think about our roadmap, and in fact, when the I'm going to take you through that in a few slides now, and I'm just thinking about how long I've got, and but this, so we published this. It actually came out in February 21. I think that's was said earlier, and the same month the government announced that building on this, there would be a new national AI strategy. So that's what we're working on now. The Office for AI is leading on that. We're doing lots of consultation, and that will be published sometime later this year, which will take the UK forward another 3. This moves very quickly. 3 years in this world. That's probably the speed at which you need to change your strategies these days. And really what we're saying is, as everybody in the UK is, and it's really difficult at the moment in the pandemic, what we've got to do is invest more, right? The fact that we had £1 billion sector deal, which was government and industry funding and some university funding, back in 2018. Well, we have to. That was just the beginning. It was a tip of the iceberg in terms of what we need. So we have to get more investment in the next comprehensive spending review to take us forward, bigger and better. And we've got to, look at how things have changed in the last 3 years and how they might change in the next 3 years. Thank you. Next slide. So these are the 3 pillars, and I will whiz through them, and then maybe we can pick up some of them in the panel discussion. I'm going to focus on the first 2. Oh no, I want to focus on all of them actually. But let's just go through the first one is research, development, and innovation. Next slide, please. And really, what we said to government here was, next slide. Thank you. That we have to have more money, basically. No, back to, we've gone too far forward. We had too many next slides. Thank you. That's it. Research, development, innovation. We have to put more money in, right? We can't just say, right, we've put this money in for the first 3 years and that's it, fine, all done. We have to continue to invest because it's all moving very fast, and we need more people, and we need more industry to adopt, and we need government to use it. And yeah, we just got to get this it can't all come from industry. The investment has to come from the public sector as well. We cemented the fact that we believe the Alan Turing Institute should be a truly national institute, and I won't bore you with the details of that, but the way it's funded is probably going to change. And actually, Chris talked about the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, and the role of that is changing too, although it still has ethics very much in its title. And I chair the Ada Lovelace Institute, which is a completely independent institute funded by the Nuffield Foundation that does a lot about AI and ethics and accountability. That is totally independent of government. And then the third one there is the moonshots. There was a lot of talk at the time about government, the moonshots we need, like a digital twin ecosystem in the UK and the net carbon emissions. And so really saying that AI is going to be part of all this. So it needs to be considered it's one of the main building blocks of any of these big challenges. So we need to put research in that is compatible with that sort of aim. We have to fund explainable AI and all the other big unsolved problems in AI, and develop new areas of AI, because it won't all be about machine learning forever. It hasn't always been about machine learning, and it won't be about machine learning forever. I realise I've got to go through very quickly. So skills and diversity next. Thank you. Next slide. Now, this is the one I'm partly responsible for, and in terms of steering and passionate about, because we said, basically we funded in the first round research fellowships, PhDs, industry-led masters, and now we're bringing in apprenticeships at that higher education level. So we said we need more of this. And my point is, actually, if you're going to fund masters and research fellows and PhDs, they all need AI professors to supervise them. And AI professors get bought out by industry very quickly, and they take a long time to grow. So we have a real problem of filling the pipe and making sure we develop a very good enabling people who go out to industry to come back into academia with all those skills and come back in and be able to lead in the higher education sector and research sector much more adaptable and agile about that. Diversity is so important. I've been talking about lack of diversity in technology for so long, and really there was a report out from the Alan Turing Institute that just a month ago that said the gender skills gap in AI is worse than we thought. They've done an evidence-based report that shows how few women are working in the AI industry in the UK or are in research in AI. AI being interpreted as machine learning at the moment. And it's really scary, because this means my mantra is, if it's not diverse, it's not ethical, because my argument for that is, if you have a team that is not diverse, it's more likely to develop unfair and biased systems, not because people are malicious or trying to do it, it's just that we are all biased. And if you only have a small subset of society developing these tools and technologies, just like this, the iPhone, which doesn't fit into women's hands, right? It's too big for our hands. And we're 52% of the population, and there's lots of other things to worry about with diversity as well. You know, the fact that the image recognition systems don't recognise black faces as well as they do white faces, and anyway, all these issues. I could talk for, and I know we've got a panel going to talk about that. And then the final one, 6 there, is about how we want to expand now beyond higher education and into further education and schools and AI skills for everybody, effectively. Anyone who wants to get into this world, whether they've got a science background or not, because they don't all have to become machine learning programmers. There's so many jobs and skills in AI that will be very diverse backgrounds as we move forward. I'm very conscious of time. 2 more slides, and I won't go through them in detail. The next slide, please. Yes, thank you. That's it. Then slide on data infrastructure and public trust. One of the first recommendations in the original AI review, in fact, it was the first recommendation, was about data sharing and setting up legal and ethical environments in which data could be shared between companies, between government and companies, between government and individuals, companies and individuals, that in legal and ethically compliant ways. And that's something we're working on a lot in the UK. I've just chaired a report on legal mechanisms for data stewardship, which has had a lot of influence. And this we've put this as we're going to develop this a lot in the new AI strategy to build on what we've done and show, we hope, leadership. World leadership in this area. And then the 4th one, in the interest of time, going very quickly, is all about the next slide, please. This is the last slide. Which sectors are going to be big in the next 3 years for the use of AI. Obviously health, the net zero carbon emissions, and just recently the Prime Minister set an even tighter target for that. Security, our startup community, AI in the public sector, how increase confidence in buying AI. That's it. I'm done. That's another part of the strategy. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Wendy. You will stay with us on stage or on the screen as you're part of the next segment, which is the panel debate on data from a policy and ethics perspective. What's the current situation and outlook in the Nordics and the UK? The moderator for this session is Inga Strumke. Inga is a postdoc in explainable AI at the Simula Metropolitan Center. She has recently been listed as one of Norway's 50 leading women in tech 2020. Please do post questions in the chat bar. We will try to go through them if they're at the relevant topic, or we will try to address them at the end. But Inga, over to you.
Yes, hi, thank you very much. And I'm sorry about the echo in the room that I'm sitting in. I hope it's not too distracting. I'm moving, I'm living in a box. Okay, so thank you so very much, Wendy. If only we had enough time to discuss everything you mentioned. So we'll move swiftly on to panel discussion about data from a policy and ethics perspective, the current situation in the UK and the Nordics, and of course, outlooks. I can briefly introduce myself first. My name is Inga Strumke. I'm a particle physics doctor. That means that particles come to me when they feel sick. I'm joking, they don't do that. No, because right now I work or I do research in explainable AI, which means that I love AI enough to spend my days on it. And I think that understanding what's going on is the most important thing for us to do. And the understanding is exactly what we're doing in meetings such as this one. So that's why I'm very happy to be here. And so now we will try to understand what's going on with AI policy and ethics. And to do that, we have 5 wonderful panelists whom I will introduce in order and by giving each of them the stage for a small 2-minute opening statement telling us about their views and also mentioning what they have learned with regards to AI policies over the last 5 years. So first, I would like you, Benedict Dellert, Head of AI Monitoring at the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation, to share your views.
Thanks very much, Inga. Yeah, I just want to point out 3 or 4 lessons that I think we've learned in the UK with regards to how to effectively govern AI and data-driven technology. So I think the first one is, and it sounds obvious, but it's incredibly important, is just to realize how varied this landscape of technology is and to disaggregate this overall term where possible. So we're talking about hundreds of applications, each developing and being deployed at different speeds. You have autonomous vehicles, you have facial recognition technology, you've got AI-powered deepfakes, you've got AI-powered smart speakers, and each of those different applications requires a different governance approach. And so we need to get as specific as possible when we talk about policy. The second lesson for me is to pay attention to the boring applications of AI and data-driven technology. So often those being hidden from view, but just because they're not talked about, just because they aren't featured within media reporting and think tank reports and so on, doesn't mean they're not important. So I'm talking about things like the use of machine learning algorithms in the personal insurance sector to determine the cost of people's premiums. Talking about things like the use of AI in the energy sector to predict pressures on the energy grid. And if we don't get those things right, however dry and on the surface uninteresting, then that's an issue. So let's not get too distracted from hype and what appears glossy. Third lesson for me is really that the art of governing AI requires us to use the full repertoire of regulatory tools at our disposal. And I think if we go back to 5 years ago, it did feel like the only things we could do to govern AI were either come up with high-level principles, fairness, transparency, accountability, and so on, or at the other extreme, implement bans. And so we had lots of calls for banning of facial recognition, banning of emotional AI, banning of deepfakes, and so on. And I'm sort of characterizing and exaggerating a little here, but there certainly hasn't been that much nuance in debates about AI governance. And I think what we've started to see over the last few years is a maturing of that debate, a maturing of governance approaches, and a recognition that we can have a mixture of self-regulation, industry codes of practice, institutions that could be established to audit and assure how firms use this technology. So it can't just be allow it or prohibit it. And then fourthly, I think there's obviously a recognition as well that AI and data-driven technology is more than just a threat. It's easy to talk about this technology as something that will cause harm, that will impinge on privacy, exacerbate discrimination. But we shouldn't forget, of course, that AI solves problems and has the potential to make society better. And we've seen that very clearly during the pandemic. We've seen this technology support the development of new vaccines, help us understand whether lockdown measures are working, help us to identify vulnerable residents in local areas in need of support, lots of different use cases. And I think that if this is a moment of reflection, then we can reflect on the benefits that AI has brought us. So those are just some of the very quick and obvious lessons I think that we've learned over the past few years.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ben. And I certainly applaud the last point, definitely. Next, we're so lucky to have Ingeborg Frøysnes with us, who's a policy advisor at ICT Norway and has experience also from AI startups in Norway. Ingeborg, what are your views and what have you learned?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me. I work as a policy advisor at ICT Norway. We're a Norwegian independent interest organization with about 350 member companies that all work within the ICT sector. We represent larger global companies as well as small Norwegian startups. So my perspective is more from is more of an industry perspective in that sense. And I would like to point out, Wendy spoke about it, you know, the size of the domestic market and the implication that has. Norway has an incredibly small domestic market, and we are very dependent on accessing larger markets, in particular the European. And so therefore it makes sense to sort of comply with and adhere to standards and regulations set by the European Union, in particular with regards to the Union's ambitions of a digital single market. And I think that also explains why Norwegian AI policy is very similar to EU AI policy. And if we look at EU AI policy, it's very much about protecting privacy, ensuring the rights of citizens, basically ethical application of AI solutions. And in terms of lessons, I don't know if I have one lesson, but I would say that it's become very relevant and very obvious that the topic of policy and ethics, particularly in the European sphere, is now also very much a discussion on how to maintain and ensure the European competitiveness on a global technological arena.
All right, thanks a lot, Ingeborg. Next, we have Christian Gutmann, who's an executive director of the Nordic Artificial Intelligence Institute. Welcome to the panel, and may I ask you to share your views?
Yeah, certainly. Hey, thanks so much for being here. What a great panel. Super input so far. And yeah, maybe three parts. First one, quick introduction of myself. So I've been working with AI for the last 25 years. I've done my PhD in AI psychology. I'm also a professor in Australia still, now here in the Nordics. So it's sort of a scientific technological depth. I've also been in many panels in Europe working with governments. Then I'm also active in the startup world. So I started businesses myself, entrepreneur. So really taking these research insights into business, which is of course a totally different world. And I work for large corporations in the world, in Australia, in the Middle East, in the US and Japan, to really see how this all applies. And in all those years, I've been really having a foot in the scientific academic world, and then of course also turning this into value, right? So it's quite different experiences. So that's one part. Quickly, the Nordic AI Institute, which I'm representing most now, is really looking at creating a network of leading talent that have essentially a triple background. One is they have a deep technological and scientific background, so they are professors or are associated universities. They are business leaders, so global heads of AI, for example, of big organizations in the world, and also have a very strong relationship to government, because all those three are very important to build a proper ecosystem. So that's that. And then I'm actually also the global head of AI at one of the largest IT companies here in Europe. That's just worth noting on the side. Now, some learnings, plenty of learnings. I don't know, I started making a little small list and it became quite big, but let me try to summarize some observations that I now experience quite deeply working with some of the largest companies here in Europe, and in fact also globally, where I speak to the leadership, both in the industry world and also in the government world. And I think one thing is really this cultural change. It becomes so apparent when you work in a smaller startup versus where I'm now back again in the larger cooperative world or with public organizations, that changing a culture in these large organizations, which are sometimes 50, 100, 150 years old, is really very, very challenging. And there are very good reasons for such difficulties to occur. And in that, I see that some of the reasons it's not just the technology, but it's really more and more questions that I'm facing when the leadership is scratching their head as to which direction to go, is also the business and the culture. How should the culture of the organization change, and how should the culture adapt to these new technologies? So that's, let's say, learning, and I'm still in the process of learning. That's certainly not completed. Another one related to this first topic is that AI talent is key. So I have seen far too many folks now in the ecosystem that do not have the let's say the deep experience in this field in order to really make good suggestions as to which way to move forward. So it's still quite a new field. It's a bit like if medicine was introduced now to society and it hasn't really been existing 10 years ago. Now it becomes a topic which is very important. And so having deep skill, which means mathematics and computation, is a basic requirement, just as you would have in the medical system, in the hospital system. So when you look at the big hospitals in Europe or in the world, you see that the CEOs of these hospitals they are medical practicing doctors, and there's a reason for that, why they are also CEOs. And I see this is a requirement in the AI field too. I think also if there's 3 other topics that I look at: moonshot projects. When we look at visionaries and visions to be articulated in Europe, I see a distinct lack of that happening. When you look at other places in the world, back to JFK taking a man to the moon and back, or many business leaders, they're much more prominent and much more bold in presenting a way forward. I feel a distinct lack of that in Europe, to be just a little bit critical, if I may. And then, of course, also what is happening, and Inga, we can also take it to the next slide. I'm not sure because I can go on, but maybe one other quick thing is, of course, the investment culture and entrepreneurial culture, which we don't have as strong as it might exist, for example, in Silicon Valley or in Shenzhen. So there are generations of entrepreneurs, of investors that have been very successful. If you now go to the Valley in San Francisco and you want investment for AI, you not only find the money, which is plentiful, coming back to the sector because companies like Amazon and Facebook have been successful, but also the skill of building entrepreneurial businesses. So I leave it here. There's more points, but it's really, really good to have the focus.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I guess we have many interesting things to talk about and very little time. But I just want to say it's definitely allowed and even encouraged to be critical. So thanks a lot for that. Now let's move on to Alex Moltzow, who's responsible for AI policy and ethics at the Norwegian AI Research Consortium, also known as NORA. Alex, what have you learned over the last few years?
Hi, my name is Alex. I'm the Norwegian Artificial Intelligence Research Consortium. It's a collaboration between 7 universities and 2 research institutes. I'm also a student in social data science at the University of Copenhagen, combining social science and data science techniques, and a member of the Norwegian Digital Ethics Council. So my focus is AI policy and ethics in NORA. I have 3 points that I would just like to kind of introduce before this discussion. And the first one is that better governance in the field of AI is increasingly important for society. Various initiatives from governments can make a difference. I find the discussion of national strategies around the world especially interesting. I've read most of them and try to engage with these new policies and regulations. Secondly, the focus on sustainability has more potential in discussion of AI applications. This includes, of course, inequality, gender, and other aspects that need more focus. It is either absent in AI discussions or more relegated to energy efficiency rather than a broader definition of sustainability. And third, we need to think more about AI in relation to the climate crisis. This seems nearly absent in most policy discussions of AI, and we have to consider both the impact of technology on a broader scale and in specific applications. I saw Wendy maybe disagreed a bit. It has been increasingly a focus, but I think we have to make sure that this discussion of the climate crisis is even more front and center, also in regulations and also in policies that we introduce. And I will kind of get back to that a bit more, and hopefully in discussion of the new policy proposed by the EU. So that's for me, and I really look forward to the discussion.
Can I just come back at Alex there? I think it's firmly in our strategy going forward. I agree. I mean, we're going to do that this year. We have to put real stuff in, real things in there. Oh, what was the point I was going to make? The other thing, of course, is that all this computing doesn't help the planet either. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can absolutely hear you. And I was actually just going to ask you if there was one point you wanted to ask, and of course, welcome you to the panel.
I just wanted to come back on Alex to say in the UK AI strategy, we firmly got looking at how AI supports the net zero targets. But we have to also consider that too much computing is not good for the planet either.
Yeah, and I think it's also a broader discussion of what computing entails, right? I mean, in terms of materials for data centers, the whole ecosystem as well. So, absolutely,
huge amount of resources. I mean, we have no chips at the moment, right? And it takes a lot of planet resources to make chips. And every time we play a video, so we've all gone online during COVID, good, but every time you do a video on the internet, it takes an awful lot of power from the system. And we've got to get that into balance as well.
If I just may very quickly comment on that, I agree a lot. And I think part of my team, a big part of my team is actually looking very much at the efficiency of the algorithms. So as you know, right, sometimes you can have very valuable trade-offs where you say, look, you achieve 90% of the computational quality, let's say, but you have, let's say, you have reduced the amount of electricity consumption by 90%, let's say, right? So those considerations are very much in our mind, and it's particularly important to the public sector. So very much underline that, very important. Some people in my team are particularly enthusiastic about it, so it's always great to encourage them.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to hear this, and I also have to give Alex a compliment that he is the one person I know who keeps bringing this up, and I think it's very important. Of course, because of that, it does pain me a bit, but we have to move on. We have so little time. So Ben, I want to ask you, you're the head of the UK's AI monitoring team, and in June 2020, you published the first AI barometer. Can you tell us briefly what this is, what you found, and perhaps if climate also is part of it?
Yeah, so the barometer it's essentially a tool to help decision makers prioritize their time and resources. So the rationale for this is that there are so many issues to look at here, whether it's misinformation on social media sites or the risks of using predictive algorithms in policing, or the opportunities of things like sharing energy meter data in the energy sector. And if you're a policymaker with a limited amount of time, budget, resource, you need to prioritize your attention. And so that's the sort of rationale for the barometer, is to help decision makers understand where they should focus their efforts. And so the way that it works is that we pull together panels of experts for 5 sectors. This was last year. One of those was energy, and the others were finance, healthcare, and a couple of others. And then we sent them a lot of risk statements and opportunity statements, and we asked them to rank those. And sometimes we came back with obvious answers. So facial recognition, for example, scored very highly. That wasn't a surprise in terms of its risk in crime and justice sector. But then some things came up that we just weren't really thinking enough about. So within the crime and justice sector, for example, our experts highlighted that the collection of victim data within criminal court proceedings, so victim data from phones and laptops, and the risk that poses to privacy was seen as an issue. And that's just something that we hadn't really been paying much attention to. And now that we had that as information, we could start paying attention to it and encourage policymakers and regulators to pay attention to that as well. So yeah, it's really just a tool to help us to make sense of this very confusing, busy, chaotic landscape where there's a lot of hype, a lot of speculation, where we pay attention to things which are sensational and don't pay attention to things which are important but not sensational. And so that's our tool for trying to get through that challenge.
Thanks a lot. I would like to ask Christian and Alex, do you think that something like this could work in the Nordic countries? And then I also want to bring in Ingeborg afterwards.
Yeah, I think what what Ben has achieved, and what we can achieve together in better kind of understanding what is happening within the field of artificial intelligence, but also not only kind of just bringing up a number, but also kind of this communication within governance of artificial intelligence. I think that's really where we are building possibly a lot of competencies and in government, right? And for artificial intelligence to be beneficial for society, we need to disseminate this knowledge. So I think, I just have to applaud, what Ben and his team has been doing, because I think it's absolutely essential if we are to succeed in making artificial intelligence, broadly speaking, work for society.
Christian, do you agree? Do you have a different view?
No, I agree, and regrettably, a couple of bits where I didn't hear everything that Ben said. But I mean, one important part that I'm seeing here being important in order for that to be really broadcast is, of course, going back again to the knowledge and the experience that you have had in your team. It might be worth elaborating a little bit more on that, but I think this is a very important factor and driver in making this work. And I think you mentioned one thing that I heard, and I agree very much with is the what did you call it? Like when you are making this topic, you scandalize it or you really bring it out in the media, right? It becomes a very bigger thing than it usually is. I have been involved more on the private side, although I like it very much. It's more like when you start making movies and art, right? So I have been advising some, and I'm a bit, it's a different area completely as to what we're discussing here. But of course, if you have movies like Jaws, right, the white sharks, it gives white sharks a much worse reputation than they really are. And people think that the chances for them to be eaten by a shark in Australian waters, let's say, it's much higher than anything else in their life. But driving down from your house to the beach is actually a higher risk of dying. And so I'm thinking there's a bit of that part, right, where you want to be smart about how you're presenting this technology and not giving the floor too much on the wrong side of the story, right? Like emphasizing risks which are not and yeah, let's say a picture of AI which is not so realistic, let's say, So that's something I couldn't agree more on. Need to be careful.
So Ingeborg, do you think that something like an AI barometer could help the companies that new and changing AI policies will apply to know what to expect?
Yes, and firstly, I have to say I'm still terrified of white sharks, just to make that clear.
All movies.
Absolutely. I mean, the work that Ben mentions it's incredibly important because it highlights concrete examples, and it also gives guidance, which is very much what companies are looking for in this very complex world. And in terms of, the examples Ben gave are also about the rule of law, maintaining these values. And in that regard, I would like to also sort of highlight the work of the Council of Europe on ensuring human rights and the rule of law and democracy in this digital age. So those, I think anything that provides guidelines and examples is useful for the industry.
Thank you, Ingeborg. Now, we are actually already at the point where we should start accepting questions from the audience, but there is one final question that I really wanted to address to Wendy. Wendy, Norway has a very digitalized public sector and has a very digitally capable population like the UK. So we definitely have great potential, but our AI regulation is mainly based on what the EU is doing. Now, if you could give Norway kind of your best recommendation at this point, what should Norway do? Something the UK has already done or something different?
That's a tough one. The UK, now it's left Europe, is considering its position in terms of European regulations. Nothing's been decided. We're not moving away from anything, but it's definitely considering that. And I think I mean, I've just written, I'm going to plug my book, The Four Internets, which is out next month. And this is about how the internet is evolving differently in different parts of the world. And you've got the open and universal internet that we're all using now. And then you've got market force led in the US, data protection led in Europe, and surveillance led in China. But these have all got to coexist. Right, they have to coexist. And my worry about the European attitude is it doesn't coexist. It says you've got to do it our way or no way at all. And the elephant in the room is that China's never at the table. Now, we have all sorts of geopolitical problems with, you know, China and the US and the UK and everyone flexing their muscles with a new president in the US. And Russia hovering, you know, there's all sorts of big geopolitical problems we've got to deal with. But you have to have China at a climate change conference, because you can't talk about climate change if you've got, you know, 20% of the world or more missing from your discussion. And it's exactly the same in this world. For example, UNESCO set up a global partnership for AI. I don't know if Norway's an independent member. The UK is. And it's called the Global Partnership for AI. I think most countries who are interested in AI are members. The EU's a member, and I think the separate countries are members, as usual. But China's not. China's not been invited in. I mean, it just makes no sense to me. We have to work out what we can agree on and what it's okay to disagree on. And so I think you have to have a worldview as well as obviously looking at your biggest trading partner. So I would just say look up and out a bit.
Oh, thank you. We're all taking notes with both hands. So now the question is, with the 7 minutes that we have left, the organizers said at some point that they wanted to moderate the questions that have come in, because I have to admit that I've been paying more attention to the panelists than to the comment section.
Yeah, so, hi Inga. You can continue a little bit more. There's currently no questions in the chat bar, so I know you have some backup questions for the panelists, so feel free to keep going.
Oh, absolutely. We haven't even touched upon ethics, and I want to talk about ethics. Because what I've been noticing is that ethics guidelines appear all over the world, but they're often very vague and certainly don't draw many red lines. So I want to ask you first, Ben, do you think AI policies and ethics should be separate fields, or which kind of interplay do you see between them? Should ethics be something, you know, voluntary and mostly related to reputation?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think ethics is it's often quite a slippery term that means 100 things to different people. And I often hear people say during discussions on policy and regulation and law that we need to think more about ethics. But for me, just to get into the semantics for a moment, policy and law and regulation are just, in my mind, the levers that we have to implement and realize our ethical values. So they're not separate domains, they're intimately linked. So ethics means a consideration of what we deem to be good and valuable in the world. So fair treatment, privacy, accountability, and at least within the UK, and I assume within Europe as well, we're sort of agreed on those high level principles. And these are embedded and then promoted and sometimes mandated via policy and law. And the clearest example of that is the Human Rights Act in the UK. We also have the Equality Act, Protection of Freedoms Act, and so on. The difficulty is when those values become in conflict with one another, and then we need to make some decisions. So if you take the example of facial recognition, we value privacy, but we also value security. And so where is the point along that spectrum that we feel, okay, well, we're willing to sacrifice a degree of privacy for extra security? And then who makes that decision? And really, in a democratic society in Norway and the UK, we want that to be a decision that's made with the wider public in a way which is, we can't consult the public on everything. So we need to find out which of those issues are the most burning that we need to consult the public on. And also for me, there's a big question of which levers you use. So yes, we have laws like the Human Rights Act, which try to codify our ethical principles, our ethical values. But is that really enough on its own? Do we also need things like specific codes of practice that say, and this is what we specifically should allow for the use of facial recognition, or the use of predictive policing algorithms, or the use of outcomes in insurance. And where do you get to a point where you say, okay, well, we've set enough, we've prescribed enough, we've been specific enough. We then leave it up to the market, up to developers and users of the technology to decide what's right. So there's so for me, I think that the easy question is talking about the link between ethics and policy. The harder question is dealing with the trade-offs between different ethical values and then determining which policies to use, which allow for sufficient freedom of movement for those using and developing the technology.
Yes, and I think this is actually an excellent question that can go to all the panelists, because I mean, codifying ethics is difficult because of the question of kind of which ethics, right? We don't even agree on ethics outside of computers. And Wendy touched upon this, right? The internet is international, and so is AI, obviously. So I would like to ask all the panelists, do you think we need or could even have global AI regulations based on ethical systems when the ethical systems around the world are so different? So anybody can go first. If not, I will assign somebody.
Yes.
Alex?
Yeah. So I was asked to do some homework for this because the EU, they have released a proposal for the Artificial Intelligence Act last week on the 21st of April.
And you read the whole thing?
Yeah, I read it, and it's quite long. It's 107 pages, and yeah, it's a lot to take in. And if we talk about codifying ethics, this kind of whole ethical discussion of like what Europe is supposed to be as a society, I think with the GDPR, you know, which was a horizontal kind of you know, really wide approach to data policy, it had a huge influence around the world, right? You know, the way we think about protecting personal data has changed completely, right? Since you know, since that was some discussions about what we would like data to be for an individual, and now with artificial intelligence and the way that it is being applied in China, the way that it is being applied in different places around the world, I think, you know, these ethical discussions that have been going on in Europe, you know, that Wendy has been part of, and that other, you know, people have taken part in. There is kind of an attempt at, you know, saying, what is it that we value in society, and what is it we value in Europe? You know, it tries to kind of approach this high-risk systems, right? That's a very, very core aspect of this Artificial Intelligence Act. And, you know, it lists a lot of things, right? So critical infrastructure, you know, healthcare, education, employment, credit scores, you know, emergency response, law enforcement applications, migration, certain justice and democratic processes, right? We're talking about a wide range of different issues in society that we're now seeing that artificial intelligence has an influence on, right? To some extent, the way that we make decisions, the framework for decisions is important. So, so that way, this regulation attempts to address it. Does it? You know, that's open for discussion, and I would really like to, you know, to hear more in the probably coming months about this. But I still find it's a really great attempt. You know, it's a really, really good attempt at trying to kind of address this question.
Wow, thank you so much, Alex. I'm impressed also by how much you've been able to read already. Okay, Ingeborg, and then Christian.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to add like a quick note, and that is that we can talk about ethics all we want, but it doesn't really help if we don't have people with the right skill sets to implement it. And so I think that's also from an industry point of view, a really important aspect where, in particular in Norway, we see that you know, when we educate data scientists. Sorry, is there an echo, or can you hear me okay?
Yeah, but somebody needs to mute. Antonio, mute. There we go. Thank you.
Sorry, I kept hearing myself, which is very confusing.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah. No, but I think in Norway in particular, we see that, for example, you know, we educate data scientists, but we don't provide them with, or the universities don't provide them perhaps with enough knowledge of digital ethics. And so it becomes sort of like an industry responsibility to educate data scientists on this. So that's just a small note on the importance of developing people with skills to implement ethics as well.
Yeah, that's not a small point, and it's incredibly timely. Thank you so much. Christian.
Yeah, exactly. And if I just add on top of that, it's those that create the policies too that need an enormous amount of knowledge around, computation, mathematics, AI. It's not just giving it to the people that then implement it, right? So you need it upfront in the beginning. What should Norway and UK do? I think I recommend those countries to start looking internationally. The GDPR, what got introduced when the world was very immature when it came to data. So therefore, GDPR became a very big thing for the world. But now there's lots of places in the world which have already started and are quite mature. That includes China. There are many states in the US. California has introduced laws. Portland has introduced laws. So it's for Norway and for the UK. I hate to say it, but the Europe is then not the first and only place that can start having such a framework in place. So orienting yourself to these other areas. And the other one is, of course, that if there are ethics and policy ethics is always a can of worms. But if you have policy implementations, and I'm thinking that we are likely going to have a regulation framework similar to the complexity that we have in medicine and pharmaceuticals, with people that are registered, double-blind trials, and so on. It goes down this direction. But what I'm very, very much hoping that if we have such a system, that we do two things better. And Norway and UK perhaps have the ability to do that better because you do not necessarily need to follow what the rest of the Europe is doing, right? But make it quicker. The adoption of these policies, a new innovation, introduce them quicker into the system. When you look in medicine, it takes 15 years on average for new innovation to come into medical practice. Let's not do that. I strongly recommend. Let's be faster. And the other one is, of course, being constantly adaptive and real time, because AI changes a lot. Wendy mentioned it in the beginning, and most of us know we are just at the very beginning of this journey of AI. And I'm expecting every year, every couple of years, there to be a major breakthrough, which requires strategies to change, which requires policies to change. And again, you need top people that have deep knowledge about the technology, the science, and the business application in order to really be on top of that game. If otherwise, and we are already netto exporters in Europe to other places in the world when it comes to talent. So let's see that we build moonshot projects. Let's see that we make all this easy enough for startups and other businesses that want to be innovative to attract them. UK, Norway, and the whole of Europe. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. So I want to give the final word now to Wendy. Wendy, where do you think the responsibility of ethical AI lies? At which level?
Yeah. It's all of us, right? It's not just about what the government says. Actually, I keep making this point. We are stakeholders in this. It's very interesting. So many things happening. A lot of what I agree with a lot of what's been said. I disagree that GDPR has become any sort of world standard. It's become a standard to be talked about that people measure against. But the rest of the world doesn't comply with it unless they have to trade with Europe, because it's too heavy-handed. And there's also all sorts of other mechanisms one can use, like the law, but also the whole, like we do with finance, auditing. We can do, because I worry about your world, Inge, in terms of explainable AI. I think it's a race we might not win. And so, we have to be fleet of foot about the ways we manage this. But we are also responsible for things. I've seen, we've had this big problem with racial abuse in football in the UK, and the footballers are all coming off social media this weekend. That will have a huge impact on the world, that Premier footballers are coming off social media this weekend to make a point. And the other one, that the spanner in the works just this last week, was Apple saying you can't put cookies on anything. We're going to keep our data to ourselves. You, Facebook, can't look at things on iPhones. That's huge. That's huge in terms of no, of course we've got to. So there's so many things happening, and don't forget China, right? So I do think the UK and Norway the point of this symposium is that we can join together to do things that can take the best of what's Europe's coming up with and follow the guidelines, but develop our own ways to help innovation in this space, be more agile about it and fleet of foot.
All right, thank you so much, Wendy. There is just so much more I would love to discuss with you guys here, but we're already running late. So at this point, I'm going to hand the word back to the organizers, and thank you all so very much for this interesting discussion.
Thank you, Inga.
Thank you. Great panel.
Great, thank you everyone. And yeah, I totally agree with Inga. There's definitely much more to talk about. And obviously part of this event is for us to make these connections and know of each other. So hopefully we will be able to continue conversations offline. I'd now like to hand over to the second debate of today, which is going to be moderated by Claes Pettersen from NORA. So thank you so much, panelists, and over to the next round.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you for inviting me to moderate this panel debate. The topic for this panel is bridging the gap between academia and industry. We should then maybe start with the question, why? Why should we bridge this gap? Let's say that a research group develops a new algorithm for detection of a specific type of cancer, or a new language model, or maybe a new way to extract important information from health records. What happens after the project is done and the publication is submitted? Too often, I would say, nothing happens. The researcher is happy when the paper is published. Her dream is to chase another publication, to publish in Nature or to publish in Science or at the big conferences. The incentives for the researcher to translate the research results into use for common goods are not there. So what do we do then? Today, we have prominent guests from major networks and organizations in UK, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway to discuss this and other topics related to bridging this gap between academia and industry. The panel participants are Agneta Jakobsson, Head of Strategic Partnerships, AI Sweden. We have Valeria Neumova, Director at Simula Consulting, Anders Kofod Petersen, Vice Director of Alexandria Institute in Denmark, and Florian Ostman, Policy Theme Lead at Alan Turing Institute. My name is Claes Pettersen, and I am the CEO of NORA, Norwegian Artificial Intelligence Research Consortium. I will now hand over to speakers for a short introduction of themselves and an opening statement. So let's go, Agneta first, maybe.
All right, hello, and thank you so much for inviting me to this. It's been a very interesting morning, very good speakers and panel. I'm working as Head of Strategic Partnership at AI Sweden since almost 2 years back, and I think the whole goal with AI Sweden is really to facilitate collaboration between different sectors and therefore also the collaboration between academia and industry. So AI Sweden is a national Swedish center for applied artificial intelligence, and it's supported by the Swedish government and the public and private sectors across the country. We currently have, I think it is 107 different partners, and they're from corporates, academia, research, public sector, authorities, SMEs, and startups. So it's all over, all kinds of organizations. And our work is really to be the facilitator between all of them and ensure that we collaborate. Our mission is to accelerate the use of AI for the benefit of our society, our competitiveness, and for everyone living in Sweden. So the mission is really key to us and help us prioritize among all the different initiatives that come up and that we come across. So we run projects that help us reach a goal and that are of national interest in areas such as information-driven healthcare, AI solutions for the Swedish language, data-driven journalism, and AI to help tackle climate change. So we provide targeted training for our partners and the general public, and we're also building up a data factory which enables partners to make available and access data and make use of computing power and storage capacity in their AI projects. We want to contribute to a culture of sharing, cooperation and action in the Swedish AI ecosystem. And this is why we run all our initiatives in collaboration with our partners. We have set up a range of different types of networks to build bridges between different types of organizations. And as one example, I want to mention our legal expert group with representatives from our large corporates and also the public sector partners. And they meet to discuss common challenges on how to handle, for example, different things of data sharing. So this is really difficult. Many, as we understand, many lawyers and legal experts, they're in their organization. They may be the only one that needs to tackle these challenges on their own. It's very difficult to do it, and it's not always so easy to understand how to interpret laws and regulations. So this way they can meet, they can discuss, they can understand each other and take a common decision on what seems to be a reasonable way to handle things. So that is a most helpful way to work with this. So when of course we have other networks, but just those are things we do. We make sure that people meet, we identify real challenges, and then we help put together projects for this. Maybe that's a good start, or at least
that's a great start, Agneta. Thank you for the opening. Please, Valeria.
Yes, thanks a lot for inviting me being part of this panel discussion. Really looking forward to it. So my name is Valeria Naumova, and my background in applied mathematics and machine learning. And I have been working as a researcher at Simula for the past 7 years, up to last year, when essentially Simula established a new daughter company, which is called Simula Consulting, and which actually has a mission to bridge the gap between academic discoveries and real-world challenges in several ICT areas, and where machine learning and AI are part of them. And since last year, I'm leading Simula Consulting, essentially. So my background coming from research and switching to consulting and seeing how, when we, as you class mentioned, saving the world in every paper as a researcher, because that's the first sentence we write, and how it actually translates to industry, it's a huge difference. And that was especially interesting for me to see what type of challenges people face. And you don't need to be precise and improve the last step to get 100% accuracy in industry. You just want to do something simpler, easier to implement, and faster to deploy. So there are completely different challenges industry face. Through the past year, we have been working quite a lot with small companies and specifically startups, helping them to understand how they can use AI and machine learning to essentially bring their product to a more competitive level. And what we see that in many cases, companies are lacking knowledge and understanding how machine learning can what machine learning can actually do, because for some people it's just the magic that can solve everything. For some other people, they still think in more traditional, like rule-based algorithms, and they say, and they use machine learning just to use a buzzword. So what I think is extremely important is to educate people in terms of what machine learning can bring to your business. What is the business value? How can you, what type of impact you can get from your data? And educate it not in terms of algorithms, but in general, in terms of what it can give you, what are the impact, what are the results, and how to get there. And also telling more about challenges, that it's not the same, the magic. You have to have data, you have to get infrastructure, you have to deploy your model. So there are a lot of components which people need to understand. And that's, we have been working quite a lot on, and that has been extremely interesting way, essentially, but it's also quite challenging to deliver this knowledge to different people. Yes, thank you.
Challenging to bring realism to the table, I guess. Thank you, Valeria. Anders, please.
Good morning. My name is Anders. My main job is at the Alexander Institute, where I try to keep our AI scientists sober and behave. So the Alexander Institute is one of these 7 RTOs in Denmark, research technology organizations, I think. We've been around for 20 years or something, and we're actually bridging this valley of death, as it's sometimes called, that both Claes and Valeria points out, that getting these results from our universities and massage them into something that can go into industry as fast as possible. So our main purpose is actually to make sure that our customers make some more money so they can hire some more people who can pay more taxes, so I can keep on sending my kids to school for free. And then my colleagues claim they want a salary check as we go along. So you asked why we should bridge academics and industry, and I think you actually answered it in the same sentence. Because in my spare time, I maintain a professorship at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim. And when I wear the grumpy professor hat, our KPIs are basically making paper, right? So how many papers can we put out and how many people can be bothered to read them? And when I pull off my hat, I try to use the same stuff to somebody can make some money out of it. And I think that actually answers the question, because so there's a big thing in actually getting this stuff to work in the real world, because at the end of the day, that's what pays the bills. But there's also a big thing in not having to make it work in the real world, because that allows you to explore stuff which doesn't have a business case up front. So I think it's a beautiful combination. It also turns out that, and this is on my own accord only, that there aren't really that many tech problems in the real world. Most of them are organizational, and then a lot of lack of competence, as you point out, Valeria. I think that's my introduction.
Thank you. We will come back to the organizational problems, I guess. Florian, please.
Yeah, thank you, Klaas, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. So my name is Florian Ostmann. I'm the policy theme lead at the Alan Turing Institute, based in London. We've already heard a few bits of information about the Institute in earlier sessions, so I think I'll keep my comments relatively brief. But just to reiterate, the Alan Turing Institute is the UK's National Institute for Data Science and AI. We were originally founded in 2015 as an initiative of a number of universities that came together to found the institute. We've since grown to a network of 13 member universities, and since 2017 have the status as the National Institute for Data Science and AI, as Wendy Hall mentioned earlier. The mission of the Institute is, I would describe as twofold. On the one hand, our aim is to bring together data science research, the academic data science and AI research community across the UK, act as a hub, so to speak, for academic research, and do so in an interdisciplinary way, so in a way that transcends the boundaries of traditional academic departments that you often find at universities. Secondly, and just as importantly, the mission of the Institute is to act as a bridge between academic research and the non-academic world, as it were, similar to the 3 organizations that we just heard about. So we work very closely with industry, but also with government. And that can take different forms. We have a number of long-term strategic partnerships, both with private sector partners and government partners. But we also often play the role of providing one-off advice or acting as a convener for workshops. So there's a continuum of different types of activities that we pursue to perform that bridge building function. Now, I'm personally a member of the public policy program within the Institute. We're divided into 10 different research programs. And the public policy program is focused on thinking about the implications of AI for government, which includes thinking about the ethical and regulatory questions that are raised by AI and the action that government should take in that respect, but also, and that's going to be the focus for this panel, or the relevant bit for this panel, how AI can be used by government to improve policymaking and improve the provision of public services. We think that there's a lot to be gained from collaborating and collaboration between government and academic researchers and promoting more of that collaboration. But there are also clearly challenges, and I think some of them have already mentioned. Klaas, you mentioned sort of the incentive structure, right? The fact that researchers are often focused on publications. That's certainly something we see a lot. We've recently done a lot of work on online harms and hate speech, for example, where that's clearly seen. There's a lot of academic research focused on developing classifiers for hate speech online, for example, that results in published papers, but a lot of those papers aren't taken forward by industry or in policy initiatives to measure hate speech. So we're trying, that's an example of a context where we're trying to, for example, help to take stock of what academic research has achieved and try also play a coordinating role, sort of shepherd research in a direction that caters to policy priorities, and then help external stakeholders to draw lessons from that research. And there are more challenges, of course, but I'll keep those for the next round. Thank you.
Yes, but Florian, the Alan Turing Institute is recognized worldwide for its unique model of combining academia with industry, incubators, and so on. Still, the network is quite young and is kind of work in progress. How figuring out how this will work if you look at your experiences, what are the kind of lessons learned this far? Yes, you're muted.
Just lost the window. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so as I mentioned, my personal experience is primarily related to the mission of our public policy program, which is focused on working with government. But I think some of the lessons, some of the things that I'll mention also apply to the Institute more broadly. I think there's 3 points that are quite significant as an obstacle that we encounter in our work. The first one is that as much appreciation as there is for collaboration between academia and the non-academic world, and that appreciation exists on both sides. So we do get approached a lot from industry or by government. There is simply a lack of experience oftentimes, in collaborating across that boundary. So I think there's much more experience in collaborating between government and industry, for example, or suppliers, commercial suppliers to government, than there is between academic researchers and government. So part of that, I think, results in sort of potential preconceptions of obstacles or perceived cultural differences that may often turn out to be negligible or surmountable. But what's needed is sort of an opportunity to come together, get to know each other, get to know possible ways of working with each other, simply because there isn't that precedent of working collaborating between government and academia. So simply providing a forum for doing that kind of exploratory work, I think is very important. And we have a model at the Turing Institute called data study groups that tries to address that challenge as an example, where the model involves external challenge owners or problem owners, and those could come from government, but they could also come from industry, to work with the Turing Institute to develop a very, quite sort of precisely defined problem that can be approached in the form of a hackathon, basically, in a time-limited way. Think about responsible data sharing practices for that particular problem. And the Turing then works on bringing together relevant researchers from our community. So it's all quite well planned and follows a timeline with a defined output, and that can then form the basis of a more long-term relationship, or for more, it's a sort of a starting point for getting to know each other, exploring what's possible, and then defining possible long-term objectives. So that's one example for simply addressing the fact that there is often a lack of history of interacting. In addition, I'd just briefly say, I think another big obstacle simply is around data, of course. When we talk about machine learning, data access is crucial. And we are often faced with the fact that organizations themselves may not have a full understanding or limited understanding of what data they have and what that data could achieve. But then, of course, in addition to that, data sharing questions and sort of obstacles, both related to sensitivity of data, but also to other concerns, commercial concerns, for example. So there, in that respect, it's very encouraging that there's a lot of work in the UK around data stewardship models, data trusts, data collaboratives, and other models, forms of innovation to reduce the barriers to data sharing. And then very briefly, as a last point, I think continuity, ensuring continuity is an important challenge, right? So academics have certain objectives, as I mentioned, often focus on publications. If a tool is developed, that tool will need to be implemented, and it will also be maintained over time. And I think there's often an organizational challenge of finding the right people who will take care of those subsequent steps after a tool has been developed by academic researchers.
It seems like data could be a way to bring people together. Agneta, you were mentioning your data factory initiative. Could you say something more about how you kind of bring people together around the data factory?
Yes. So this is a place where our partners can both work and train their algorithms on data, so they get operational power and storage opportunities. And something that we have done is building an edge lab, which is a testbed environment that enables all different kinds of people, roles, developers, data scientists, students, researchers, and others to explore and learn about the possibilities and limitations of edge AI. So that's an example of a testbed that we built. And this became, because we do have some really large global tech companies that are part of our network as well, or partners, and they have contributed with some of the resources into the data lab. And then we have, the public sector that may have access to the data, because that's something that we really do have a lot of in Sweden. It's a lot of data from public sector, so they can provide that and come in. And then we have the different other organizations, corporates and startups and SMEs and so forth, that can really work and train their algorithms on good data. That's the idea. AI Sweden was founded about 2 years ago, so we haven't been around that much, but we have started with the Edge Lab now, and we have several organizations, Volvo Cars and Sensact, HP, Ericsson, that launched it, and then anyone can come in and kind of train their algorithms. So we view it almost like a gym, that you can come in and put in your tools and your equipment and so forth into this gym and train your work and your algorithms and so forth. So that's the idea with this.
When it comes to kind of the topic of this discussion, bridging the gap between academia and industry, what has been the focus for AI Sweden over the past 2 years?
Well, we are, very much applying. So the whole idea with AI Sweden is to help apply the knowledge and the research work that has been done by the researchers in Sweden. So we have a good collaboration with the WASP, which is the Wallenberg AI and autonomous systems and software programs program, and they develop a lot of and have a lot of investments done in researchers and funding of researchers and PhDs and so forth, and they need data, they need the real environment, they need the real problems, and that exists in the public sector and in the corporates. So it's a good combination there between the researchers and the work that is needed by the real needs that we can see that they have from the corporate side and the industry side. And the academia is also part of our network. So we have most of the universities in Sweden are involved in AI Sweden in some way, and thus we build collaboration. So they participate very much in the real projects that we run.
Exactly. Anders, how important is it actually that research and industry collaborate across borders, and how can we facilitate the transition from academia to the business world? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I think it's been mentioned also several times now that so we are measuring business and academia with two different tools, and that's fine. From a academics perspective, so businesses allows us to actually point out the window and go, oh, this cool stuff that somebody's making money on, I did some of this basic research. and the other way around, businesses can point to academia and go, oh, they discovered something, I didn't even know there was a business case for this. So these two driving forces are quite important to keep apart in a sense, because not everything has a business case for 50 years. That's kind of the definition of basic research. So I think where magic happens is this integration. And then the question is, should we now do this in each of our own small countries? I mean, Denmark, Norway are comparable, 5-6 million people each. Sweden is about the sum of us. I mean, that's a big city in the rest of the world. So in my mind, it makes absolutely no sense to just try to be national. And as somebody said in the earlier panel, I mean, AI is global. I can run my software everywhere. I can offer services everywhere. So if we really want to kick the world to make it a better place, I mean, we need to get out of our small villages around and talk to each other.
So how do we collaborate across borders then, Anders?
So I would actually say by keeping our hands off. I think it's so. I think the more we meddle, the worse it gets, right? So I mean, since the university in Bologna, we have actually been pretty good at cooperating across countries in universities, right? I mean, that's what we do. I have colleagues all over the globe, and it doesn't really matter which university they belong to. To a certain degree, you could make the same argument for businesses, right? I have competitors and suppliers across the globe. So we are already actually doing it. So if regulation and government want to do something sensible, perhaps they should give incentives to this. I mean, if we look at research funding, for example, we of course have the big box of money in EU. I'm a bit unclear if the UK can actually still have that. That's an example of what can go wrong. But we also have all sorts of other national money that tends to put up weird rules that money can't flow here and there. And we really like to put fences down. And if we could just get rid of these fences and actually measure the proper impact, being it academic or being it business, it doesn't really matter. That would really so give incentives for cooperation, not for building fences.
Exactly. And coming back to those incentives, and Valeria, what can be done to facilitate knowledge transfer and ensure that you get this translation from research and into startup and business? And how can you ensure that the startups are equipped with sufficient competence to enter the business ecosystem?
Yeah, it's quite a difficult question to have a clear and correct answer, but at least from my experience, I can see that, for instance, Cluster for Applied AI, which is a cluster organized in Halden and which aims to bring together different startups and research organizations and public organizations, aim to facilitate collaboration within the cluster and also provide some education in AI and other areas. They have been extremely successful in bringing together, for instance, academia or consultants with AI expertise and startups who need to solve specific problems. They also plan to organize so-called AI clinics where people with a lot of experience and knowledge of AI will help companies to understand how their business cases or challenges can be driven or addressed with AI. So this type of kind of clinics or sessions where you have a clear and a very open interaction between a company and some experts in the field of, can it be solved with AI? Does it make sense to solve it with AI, and how it can be solved? This would be extremely useful. So some kind of also meeting places where companies can meet again cross borders and discuss, okay, this was our use case, this is what we achieved, this is what we actually used as techniques. And examples of sharing these use cases and projects will definitely help a lot to facilitate the translation of knowledge.
Thank you. Time flies. There are some questions. I suggest that we try to answer them in the chat because I think we already now have to go to some closing statements. So please, panel, where do we go from here? If you take like maybe 2 or 5 years view, what should we do? What are you optimistic about? Anders first, maybe.
So I'm optimistic about two things. One of them is kind of normal, and the other thing is a bit boffin. So I think we are on a daily basis solving new and interesting problems with this marvelous AI toolbox. And if we look at the 17 SDGs, for example, 14 of them are optimization problems. Make more for less, basically. And that's what our toolbox can do. So I envision a fantastic future. From a more nerdy perspective, I think, so the big shiny hammer today in AI are these deep neural networks. And I find them a bit boring, but I think we are approaching some of these borders where we can't solve problems with this shiny hammer anymore. And that's fun. I mean, that's when method moves, because we now have to open up the method box and start looking at different methods and how we can explore this. So also from an academic perspective, it's a bright and shiny future.
Thank you. Agneta?
Yes, so I really like and agree with a lot of what has been said, and Anders, what you said about let's really work together. I think that is so true, and I think we can do a lot to improve the collaborations between countries and cross borders. So I'm really optimistic that we can do that, and that we can find ways to work and really try to inform each other of what works and what doesn't work, and help each other improve together. So we would very much welcome that. The first 2 years have been lots about looking at what's going on in Sweden for us and building our organization. But now we are ready to really go abroad and identify partners and work together. We are doing a few of those things with, for instance, with startups, we have identified what we call the European AI startup landscape, and we would love to have more organizations part there. So we are now working with Sweden, France, and Germany, but we would love to have more collaborators on that to identify and put on the landscape also their AI startups. Another thing that's been going on is how we can measure the AI maturity through assessments. And if we can do that and have organizations do that, they can know better how they can improve, but we can also start measuring and benchmarking against each other to help all of us improve together. So more collaboration in Europe is something we really would like to make happen the next couple of years.
More collaboration. Thank you. Valeria.
Yeah, I truly hope that despite all the negative experience with Corona, it will simplify collaboration, cross-border collaboration, because we see that you don't need to be in the office and you can meet online and collaborate. So I have a hope that this cross-border collaboration will actually work out much better after Corona. And of course, creating more, as said, meet places for sharing experiences and to be more collaborative rather than competitive, because there are so many twists and tricks which can make you competitive in business and research landscape. But sharing general knowledge is something which will benefit all of us. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Florian?
Yes, I very much share the optimism, and am very encouraged by the fact that conversations like this one are happening and the fact that we agree on so many things. I also agree that there clearly is a lot to be learned for all of us still, and the fact that we can have those conversations, is great and encouraging. And I think the knowledge exchange is sort of, there are two levels for this. There is the sort of substantial or first order questions of what can be done and where we should invest efforts and so on. But there's also the very important question of models of working. And I found this conversation fascinating because it seems like all of our 4 institutions are pursuing broadly similar objectives, but we also each have a slightly different model. And so having this conversation about different models, I think was very enlightening to me, and I hope there'll be more of those conversations for all of us to learn and to find the optimal model or combination of models, most likely, going forward.
I couldn't agree more to that. So thank you very much to the panel, and I will leave the words back to Linda then.
Thank you. First of all, apologies for running a bit late, but thank you so much to everyone participating in this panel, and thank you to you, Klaus, for moderating this session. It was a really fascinating discussion. I do wish we had more time. So we have come to the conclusion of this webinar. So thank you again to everybody for spending Monday morning with us. Especially thank you to speakers and panelists who took part. And hopefully we can go into this week being a little bit more knowledgeable and wiser about the situation and landscape of AI in the Nordics and the UK. So thank you all again, and this is part 1 of the webinar series. We will stay in touch regarding part 2, which will take place in the start of June. So I'll hope to see as many of you there as possible. Thank you all again, and have a great week ahead. Thanks.